a recorder. So I'm going to record this and see, hopefully it'll work. So, be just like last time, people sent me questions, and we'll just go through and try and answer them together. Now, people sometimes have been asking me, is this exam cumulative? And the answer is a big yes and a little no. I'm sorry, a big no and a little yes. The exam is going to cover the materials I gave you in the review sheet. And that reminds me, does anyone need a review sheet? Okay, excellent. Everyone actually has a review sheet. Good deal. So the material comes from there. But sometimes the questions assume you remember something from the previous material. For example, why did some Germans support Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party? You have to remember something called the Versailles Treaty. Right? What did the Versailles Treaty do to Germans? Right? Punished and humiliated them. Said, you're at fault for the war, and as punishment for that, you have to pay us reparations, and you can't have an army. Or you can't have a big army. And that was one reason Hitler gained support. Right? Hitler said, I'm going to restore the greatness of Germany. I'm going to wipe away this humiliation, and I'm going to make us a normal country again, a country we can be proud of. So that's one thing that happened previously that you'd want to remember. The second thing, of course, is the Depression. People didn't have jobs. Germany had a very high unemployment rate. Hitler gets into office. He creates a lot of jobs because he has a lot of people building tanks and airplanes and things to go attack people. And then they say, wait, great, we got jobs. We'll support Hitler. Right? Democracy couldn't give me a job, but Adolf Hitler could, so I'm going to support Hitler. So again, that's kind of an example. So it doesn't hurt to think a little bit back to what we talked about before. So, okay, so moving on, I had this question. How was Japan fascist? How was it not fascist? And like I say, the questions in bold are the ones students ask me, so that's the ones I want to focus on going through. So what are some characteristics of fascism? What do you need to have to be a fascist?
Control.
Control, right. It's an authoritarian government. You know, say authoritarian, totalitarian. Right. And this means, and who has the authority?
Generally the president or the leader of the country.
Right. You have a charismatic leader who has this authority, and he's supported by a masked party. Okay, and then also, let's see, authoritarian, totalitarian. This means also, because they're authoritarian, totalitarian, the government controls the economy. That's also a very key part in this. Maybe I should, yeah, that should be loud enough. Okay, so that's a very key part. We're missing one that I think is, people are maybe missing it because it's the most obvious.
Establish a party state.
Right, exactly. Right. That's part of the mass party.
It has to be ultra-nationalist.
Ultra-nationalist.
Oh yeah.
Right, they're ultra-nationalists.
Like Spain.
Also, they don't like communism much, and that's why they don't like communism, is because they're ultra-nationalists. Right, so these are characteristics of being, and they're anti-communist. So these are what you need to be fascist. Italy. Is there a question? Is it maybe my handwriting's not so good?
Oh, yeah, you can.
Oh, okay, sure, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, this is why whenever I have people turn in papers, I have them turn them in electronically so I can type my responses. My handwriting's terrible. This is my good handwriting, by the way. So I'm taking my time. So this is what fascism is, right? Remember, Benito Mussolini, the Italian, is the guy who founded fascism. Adolf Hitler imitates him. So Germany and Italy are both fascist countries. Right? Germany and Italy are both fascist countries. Japan, though, has all of these things except for a charismatic leader and a mass party. Remember, Hitler and Mussolini got up and gave speeches all the time. They were constantly giving speeches. Most Japanese people never heard the Japanese emperor talk. The first time he was on the radio, it was to surrender. And even then, they did it by recording. He had to make several recordings, and they picked which one was the best, and then they played that on the radio. You can't have a god say, right? He can't cough in the middle of his talk, because he doesn't seem so divine. So you had to have a perfect recording. So it was different. And also Japan there was no Japan Nazi party. There was no Japan Fascist Party. They lacked these things. So Japan's kind of half fascist, half not. Okay, why did liberal democracies ally with the Soviet Union?
Enemy is my friend.
Exactly. Exactly. As Frankie put, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Germany is right next to us. It's right next to France. It's right next to Britain. The Soviet Union is far away. Soviet Union is not really any better than Germany, morally speaking, but Germany is the bigger threat. Germany is the bigger threat right now. Not the Soviet Union. Germany is the threat. And the reason, this may seem like kind of an odd question to ask you to remember, the reason I want you to do that, though, is to understand why it was that despite the Soviet Union and the United States being allies during World War II, we so quickly became enemies during the Cold War. Right? It's because the reason we were allies was completely practical. Had nothing to do with shared ideology or respect or anything like that. It's completely practical. Once our common enemy was gone, we didn't like each other again. Why did Japan attack the United States?
Preemption. The preemption.
Right, preemptive strike, part of it was to knock the United States out of the war, or to weaken us so we couldn't fight the war. What did Japan do in 1937? Non-Shushan? What did Japan do to China in 1937? Right, well, right, in 1931 Japan took Manchuria, but Japan invades China in 1937. Right, Japan invades China in 1937. The United States says, don't do that. We like China. China's our friend. We don't want you to attack China. And so Japan, and so the United States says, we don't want you to attack China. If you don't withdraw from China, we're not going to sell you oil, and we're not going to sell you scrap iron. Right, they needed those resources. So they said, well, we can't withdraw from China because we need the resources. The United States is refusing to trade with us, so we'll attack the United States and we'll take what we need. Right, so it's because of China. It's an attempt to, this is one reason I like to dwell on this, because this is a world history class, right? What Japan does to China leads to the Americans coming into the war. Right? It's the invasion of China and America cutting off these resources from Japan. Okay, what did the United States see itself as fighting for in World War II? This is the alphabetical one. A, B, C, D. Democracy. E.
Equality. And
F is for?
freedom.
Freedom. Yeah, excellent, excellent. Okay, so remember that, D, E, F, right? What do we see ourselves fighting for? Democracy, equality, freedom. Okay, for the first one, or for number 10 then, how did kamikaze pilots understand their mission? What is a kamikaze?
Suicide.
Right, suicide pilot. Right, these are Japanese people who in World War II flew their planes into American ships in hopes of blowing up the American ships. And actually, militarily, it was actually a very effective strategy. So they understood that mission. Why were they willing to do it? I mean, you're not coming home. Right, one was ultranationalism.
Rewards for their families.
Right, rewards for their families, and of course to protect their families. That's a... Right, exactly. Once you died, oh, Nan, you want to add to that?
For no matter Japanese or Chinese, we will suicide because of the country. I think that's because we think no country, so we have no home.
Okay,
So
excellent.
that's why we want to.
Excellent. I think you're right, Nan. Nan pointed out this isn't, and that's the point I wanted to make, this isn't just Japanese people. Nan said Chinese people would do the same thing. If we don't have a country, we don't have a home. What will happen to our family? So they're willing to die for also this reason. So part of it's ultranationalism, we're dying for the emperor. A lot of it, though, is dying for the home. We want to protect our homes. And as Mr. Waldrop pointed out, they believed that once they died, they went to Yasukuni Shrine, where they could protect the nation. They continued to protect the nation, and the emperor would bow to them. Right? The emperor doesn't bow to anyone except at Yasukuni.
So basically, it's like they But like, I can risk my life to save 1,000 other people.
Yeah,
Almost.
exactly. And especially those 1,000 other people are your friends and family. So it makes it, that's, like I said, it's hard to get people to die for an idea sometimes. But that's very concrete. Yes, Ashley?
When we talked about why, like, the United States entered the war, it always makes me feel like the Allied system does nothing but bring hell. Because before, countries would fight between each other, and whoever lost, lost. With the Allied system, it turns into wars just because two countries don't get along.
Well, in this case, though, the United States didn't have an alliance with China.
You don't like China, get out. We're not gonna
Well,
save you.
it's tricky, though, because one thing I should stress, even though part of it was because we liked China, we wanted to support China, we also saw a strong China as in our strategic interests. So that's one reason. But yeah, no, that's a good point. And you're following George Washington's advice when he left presidential office. He wrote a letter saying what you're saying. But it's a good point to raise. Okay. Now, chapter 26, the first question someone asked about this, how were capitalist, liberal, and democratic ideals different from communist ones? I won't go through the whole thing, but I do want to show you that there was a slide dedicated to that. So that's what this slide is. I won't go through each one, but just as a clue, right? Communism tended to emphasize the power of the state to bring, and one reason the state is supposed to be powerful is to bring equal economic distribution. Right? When you think about communism, think about equality and a powerful government. The powerful government is supposed to bring us equality. And freedom, rights, can be sacrificed in order to bring equality. And there's a distrust of other organizations that are not controlled by the state. In capitalist liberal democracies, the emphasis is on productivity, not on equality. Right? Let's make more stuff, even if there's inequality. And there tends to be an emphasis on freedom, both economic freedom and political freedom, and emphasizing respect for rights, such as human rights. And people are even encouraged to have freedom to form organizations, such as private schools, churches, and NGOs, and that sort of thing. So when you think of communism, think strong government to have equality, right, and a distrust of things that are not directly connected to the government. When you think capitalism, liberalism, and democracy, think political and economic freedom, and you can have organizations other than the government. And an emphasis, though, on productivity over equality. How did the Soviet Union act immediately after World War II, and why? I'll take that one. They expanded. Like, remember, the Soviet Union has all these... the West, the Americans and the French and the British come from the West. The Soviet Union comes from the East. They smash Hitler in between. And the Soviet Union had all these troops all throughout Eastern Europe. And the Soviet Union said, we don't want to be attacked again like this. We lost 20 million people in this war. We don't want this to happen again. So they established communist governments in those countries. And in some places, they just annexed countries. For example, those stayed supposedly independent countries like Poland, Hungary, Romania, with communist governments. They just annexed Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. I don't expect you to remember those names. I just giving you examples. And it was primarily about security. We want to have a buffer between us and the Western countries. We don't want to be invaded like we were before. Right? We want to avoid this. So, and also part of that, of course, was if we spread communism, the idea is that communist countries will be our allies. So we want all these countries to be communist because then they'll help defend us. So it's primarily national security and spreading communism. The capitalist liberal democracies don't like this. They see this as a threat because communism is so different from their own ideologies. And because they see these once, they didn't, as some Americans said, we didn't fight this war so that Romania could become communist. It's supposed to become a democracy. We fought this war for democracy, equality, and freedom. That's not how they understood communism as being against those ideas. Now the problem, though, for the capitalist liberal democracies was we can't invade the Soviet Union. That will start World War III. We can't appease the Soviet Union. That's what we tried to do with Hitler, and it didn't work. So we'll contain communism. We'll try and stop communism from spreading. Right? We're going to try and stop it from spreading. Okay, so who was Uncle Wiggle Wings? One of my favorite people.
Wasn't that the guy who keeps on fighting with the lid?
Yeah.
The guy that fights with the lid, he always wiggle his wings or something.
Right.
For the kids.
And why did he do that for the kids? What was his-
Because to tell that he had chocolate and he was going to drop chocolate down.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when you see this, you may be asking yourself, why would you want us to remember something like that? And I often try to give you things like that that are kind of silly to remember, because it's to help you remember an important fact. Right? When Uncle Wigglewings would fly in his airplane, he had flour, he had coal, he had sugar, he had all kinds of different food. He had things you need. But he also threw out chocolate. He had things that you wanted. You can survive just fine without chocolate. But he could also give you things that you wanted. And this is the clue to why the capitalist liberal democracies win the war, Cold War. They not only give you what you need, they give you what you want. Right? They can not only give you what you need, they can give you what you want. They can give you the things you need to survive, they can give you a better living standard, and they can give you luxuries such as chocolates. The Soviet Union could, in many ways, give you what you needed. They could give you housing, they could give you food, but they had a hard time giving you anything else. So, like, I mean, it's kind of a silly thing. Okay, Uncle Wigglewings, why would you spend all this time talking about him? Well, that's the reason. It's a tool to help you remember these things. And a similar tool, right, goes to number 6. How did the Soviet Union view American claims to offer democracy, freedom, and equality? Right. What was the Soviet cartoon I showed you?
Bulldog.
Yeah, the bulldog. What happened to the bulldog?
He got rich and then he got snobby and he just wouldn't hang out with anybody he needs to know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And of course, he gets the money. He doesn't work for it. The old woman leaves him the money. So this is a criticism of American-style freedom. What kind of freedom is this? You have the freedom to misuse wealth, right? You have the freedom to abuse your wealth. This wealth should have been given to poor people, not to a dog. And of course, it also, as Holly pointed out, also challenges the notion of equality, right? He becomes arrogant because he's rich. He won't hang around with all his other doggy friends. I missed that, but you're right. And of course, the other thing I should point out that Soviet Union would criticize America about was equality didn't apply to African Americans, right? Equality was for Caucasian people, not for African American people. And of course, how does this cartoon also criticize American-style democracy?
He paid his way to the Senate.
Yeah, he bought his way into the Congress, and then he bought his way into the Senate. Right. So again, that's why I like to show something like that. It's a silly way. It's kind of silly, but it helps you remember how history works. So that's why I use it. Okay, what was the dilemma the United States faced in opposing communism in Latin America? I'm thinking specifically the example, I showed you the little video about Guatemala, right, 1952. In Guatemala, you had a fair and open democratic election to elect a president. So it was a true democracy, right? People got together, they voted, the person they wanted to vote for, the person who got the most votes won and became president. So for the United States, this should be good. Right? Hey, democracy. Other people are doing democracy. This is great. The problem, though, was after he became president, he tried to engage in land reform. He took property into the United States. It seemed like an attack on property rights, which seemed communist. Right? So he's taking away land from people. Now, it was land that wasn't being used, but it was owned by someone. He wanted to take that and give it to poor people so they'd have farms. So this put the United States in a conundrum. This guy was democratically elected, but he's anti-capitalist. Which is more important to us, capitalism or democracy? Right? Which is more important, capitalism or democracy? Which should the United States choose in this instance? Capitalism. We overthrew the guy. Even though he was democratically elected, he was anti-capitalist, so we got rid of him. And of course, you can remember one reason there was that fear. You can see why in the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? If you allow a communist country right next to you they can put missiles and other things that are threatening your security. So I'm not using this to just attack the United States. I want to show the dilemma, the problem that they faced. Which is more important, capitalism or democracy? You can see the same kind of thing, like I said, with Egypt today. Which is more important, women's rights or democracy? Number 10. Why did the Tet Offensive reduce American support for the Vietnam War despite the fact that it was an American and South Vietnamese victory? Well, the American people had been told constantly that we were going to win this war. We were going to win the war like next week or next month, just a short time we could win the war. But despite this, the North Vietnamese, the communists, were able to launch a massive offensive. Right? They even took over the American embassy in the capital for a few hours. Now, even though they were defeated, though, this proved that they weren't going to give up anytime soon. These people were going to keep fighting. And that said to Americans, many Americans have said, we can't win this war at an acceptable cost. So we gave up, essentially, and said we will withdraw. That took several years to actually happen, but this is why, as it showed that the North Vietnamese, the communists, were still willing to keep fighting. And they were willing to fight for longer than we were, so we decided to withdraw. In that case, we lost the test of endurance. Why did the United States win the Cold War? Again, I tried to tie that to two videos. Remember, we watched the videos about the refrigerator and the color TV, where they had Richard Nixon meeting right? And that was living standards. Right? The United States was able to give you good living standards that the Soviet Union couldn't. And then I also showed the video about jeans.
Yeah.
Right? Soviet Union could not do fashion. Fashion is important. Fashion is a combination of economic prosperity and freedom. Right? When you do fashion, it's not the government. Government does not dictate fashion. It's fashion designers. It's people who are cool who dictate it. You have to have, and fashion indicates freedom and economic prosperity. Right? So again, as seen with the clue from Uncle Wigglewings, the capitalist liberal democracies were able to give freedom and economic prosperity. They were able to give you what you needed and what you wanted. And the Soviet Union lost because they lost faith in their own system. Their own system couldn't do this, so they tried to reform to be more like the capitalist liberal democracies. This was under Gorbachev. And then people just said, well, why would we want to be communist? If we're going to be like the capitalist liberal democracies, let's just be like them. Why do we need the Communist Party anymore? Okay, chapter 30. What challenges, and I'll put this on the board, I wanted to be a little more clear, did the Philippines face after independence? One, of course, was economic development. The Philippines was fairly poor, so it wanted to develop and become richer. Another problem was the transition to democracy. Remember, one of the people on your ID or your names list is this woman, Cory Aquino. The Philippines was ruled by an anti-communist dictator. Right? The Philippines was ruled by an anti-communist dictator. It was not a democracy. The dictator assassinated this woman's husband. This woman's husband, Cory Aquino, her husband was a major pro-democratic leader. So the way Philippines politics works, she inherited his position. So she led a peaceful revolution and then became president of the Philippines. And the Philippines is still a functioning democracy today. It is a true democracy today. But this was the challenge they faced, was becoming a democracy, moving from dictatorship to democracy. And what makes number 1 and 2 difficult in the Philippines is the problem of corruption. So that's the quick answer to that. How did Japan develop economically after World War II? Well, first of all, it developed very rapidly, right? Remember we talked about the income doubling plan? Right? So Japan got really wealthy pretty fast. And it did this in part by successfully adopting high technology. Right? The Japanese became very good at technology. But one thing that is also of key importance is, remember, Japan didn't have to have an army. The United States agreed to take care of Japan's security. The United States agreed to take care of Japan's security. So Japan didn't need an army. It was able to use all its resources to develop its economy because it was relying on American defense. Why are some people concerned with the rise of Chinese power? One thing, when I taught this, I should have phrased this a little differently. I'm teaching a class on modern Chinese history right now, and the other day Miss Joyce Chai came and gave a talk to our history class, and she said, the professor said that gave reasons why people are concerned about China. But please also remember that sometimes China is concerned about other countries. Right? United States may be afraid of China, but remember, sometimes China is afraid of the United States. So I thought I should add that, because I thought she made a good point. But in this, I can't change the question because it's too late in the semester. But the question that I want people to understand is, why are some people concerned with the rise of Chinese power? And one reason, of course, is political and ideological differences. Right? China has a very different political system from the United States and from most European countries. Right? There's a different political system. And we see the world very differently. And that can lead to a kind of conflict, just like in the Cold War, right? The United States and the Soviet Union saw the world very differently. And that led to a kind of conflict. So there's some concern about that. This also relates to, for example, to India, right? India is a large economically developing democracy right next to China. These two countries have very different political situations, or political views. Another, of course, is competition over resources, particularly oil. Right? When I was young, 100 years ago, when I was young, gas, I wouldn't buy gas unless it was under $1. I'd be like, oh, wait a week, it'll go down. Right? And we talk about what changed. Well, one of the big things that changed was China's economy developed. Right? China has become very much wealthier, so more Chinese people own cars. To run factories and other things, you need oil. So there's been a growing demand for oil because more Chinese people want more oil. So that leads to a worldwide increase in the price of oil because now there's more demand, but not necessarily more oil. So there's a possibility that there could be conflict in the future over oil and other resources, right? Because if we want to keep our economies growing, we need access to cheap energy. And that's a place where you could have some conflict over one country claiming some oil, another country claiming it. It could lead to a struggle, to a conflict. Another reason that's kind of connected to that, remember we talked about islands, and that's connected to oil. Remember we talked about these islands called the Spratlys. Now China claims those islands, and China has legal and historic reasons for claiming those. But other countries also claim the islands. And those countries are closer to the islands. Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam are actually a little closer to, well, Philippines is very much closer. And so to Chinese people, those islands, they're ours, right? If you're Chinese, you say, these are ours, we have good reason to legally claim them as ours. But if you're from those other countries, you see that as China expanding its power very close to you. And it may make you a little nervous, especially if, Philippines is maybe 1/12 the size of China. It's much smaller and weaker than China. So Filipino people might be concerned with that. Now, why do so many Chinese people accept communist one-party rule?
It works.
It works. Yeah, Nan?
Professor, can I add something in
Sure.
question number 8?
Yes, please.
I think the reason I think is the position in the world.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear
The
you.
position in the world.
Position in the world, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From my opinion, the America is the most powerful country in the world. So maybe, like you are the champion, so maybe you are afraid of competition.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. If I can tell me if I'm restating this correctly. So the United States is the most powerful country in the world,
Yeah.
and China is growing. So we're concerned because China will be competing with us for that power. Yeah, I think that statement is accurate. Yeah, thank you.
I want to add something to that too. As like we've been at that top for so long, so it's just like somebody else coming above you for that long time. It's just like, what do they have that we don't, and what do we need to do to change it?
Right, exactly. It creates a kind of nervousness, and that creates tension. And that's one reason why we have a situation where Americans are sometimes afraid of China, Chinese people are sometimes afraid of Americans. Right, so hopefully we can avoid being too fearful of each other and avoid any conflict. Yes, Ashley?
In the modern China class you were talking about, aren't they doing like there's a book about like, is China dominating the 21st century?
Well, does the 21st century belong to China? Yes.
Yeah, I was reading that book.
Oh, excellent. Oh, I'm glad. I hope. Are you enjoying it? Or? Yeah, it's. Yeah, it's fun. Take my modern 2 years. Not next year, but the year after, I'll offer modern China again, probably. So
On that
welcome.
note,
Right.
I read an article on Popular Science that like 90% of rare earth materials that are being used in technology today are being produced out of China. And so as the future goes on and we become less dependent on oil and more dependent on other resources
Right.
that we need, China has a large access to that, and their economy can grow a lot faster than ours can.
Right.
Which, I mean, that might tie into that too.
Yeah, it does. I've never been in a review session that became a discussion. This is really cool. Excellent. I'm sorry I feel bad. This is, maybe we'll have some time. We can start it up again. But excellent point, right? Just to repeat what Frankie was saying, that China has control over some resources that will become increasingly important in the future, and that will actually aid China in its rise to power. Excellent. This is why this is fun. It's good to have people from lots of different countries and places together. We can have an interesting discussion. And we'll probably have an interesting discussion on number 9, too. Why do so many Chinese people accept communist one-party rule? And then Frankie had already started to answer that, because it worked. Right? People were poor, and now they're rich. Or more people are rich, not everyone. But right in the 1980s, China became increasingly wealthy. And the guest speaker who talked to my modern Chinese class, to give you an understanding, how she explained it, which I thought was really good. She was born in 1977. She said, I have almost no pictures from when I was a child because we didn't have a camera. Right? We were so poor we didn't have a camera in 1979, or 77, 78, 79 when I was a little kid, so we don't have pictures. Now, when she gave her talk, she had digital photos of her family, and she took pictures in the classroom. Right? That's a major change in wealth, right? Our family can't afford a camera to, hey, now we have a digital camera, we can take pictures everywhere. So wealth, right? Under the communist government, China has developed economically.
There's also that picture in the PowerPoint that has like the family sitting down to eat.
Yeah, right, exactly. That kind of symbolized it. Another reason, of course, is that the Communist Party overcame the century of humiliation. And one way to kind of remember the 2008 Olympics in China. Right? Chinese people could say, look, the world looked down upon us at one time. Now the world respects us. That's why we have the Olympics here. Right? So it overcomes the century of humiliation. Communist Party helped make China wealthier, helped make China more powerful. So it's working. And what's also key, just like with the exam system, the government is willing to open the party so that you can join it. Right? It's willing to share power. So it's better to join the party rather than to try and beat it, just like with the exam system. So I think there's other reasons, but I think these are some of the key reasons. Yeah, Frankie?
The only other one that I really see in Chinese communist one-party rule is that if their party doesn't work or something, if they encounter an obstacle, they're willing to change. Right. In order to overcome some problem.
Yeah, exactly. The party is very flexible. It's been very good at morphing and changing.
And the one in the Communist Party in Russia was not.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Nan, Xuxian, do you want to add anything before we proceed?
Number 9?
Yeah, number 9.
Because in China, if Chinese party absorb lots of good people resource in college and some company that people works very well or study very well, they can allow to join the party.
Okay, excellent. So the most talented people join the party. So of course they're going to support the rulership of the party, and they're going to be able to do it because they're the most talented. Excellent.
And they can like share the wealth almost.
Right, to a certain degree, it's good at distributing the wealth in that sense. Yeah. So Nan, you want to?
I want to add something because the party is the education, the elementary school, it's free for us to join the elementary school.
Right, so you're taught that you should accept the party.
Yeah, and I think that the poor people, most of the poor people accept the communist party because of, for example, the hospital is really cheap. And the hospital here is very expensive.
Right.
And what else is cheap?
Well, that's that equality idea.
The books, like the books, educational. the books in like beer can bookstore is really expensive. In China, the books is very cheap, so poor people can buy it. Poor
Right.
people can earn the education from it.
Excellent, excellent. And that goes to that communist ideal of equality, even over productivity. Right? But in this case, China's managed to be both productive and have some equality. Excellent, thank you. Now, next question, how are India and Pakistan different? There's essentially two differences I want you to understand. First of all, what is the majority religion in India? Hinduism, right? In Pakistan? Islam, right, exactly. What kind of government does India have? Democracy, yeah. India is the world's largest democracy. India is the world's largest democracy. Pakistan, it kind of alternates between being a democracy, but then the democracy will get overthrown by a dictator. So it generally tends towards dictatorship. So Hindu majority, democracy, Islamic dictatorship / democracy. Right? India is the largest democracy, primarily Hindu. Pakistan, authoritarian, sometimes democracy, mostly Muslim. 29, how did decolonization take place in Africa? Differently. Sometimes it took place peacefully, sometimes there was fighting. Sometimes people left voluntarily, sometimes they didn't. How did Muslims respond to Russia's invasion of Afghanistan? Remember, Osama bin Laden is the key example. He actually goes and joins in the struggle against the Russians, against the Soviet Union. And many other Muslims did the same. What was Osama bin Laden's strategy against the United States? Provoke the United States into attacking the Middle East, into invading the Middle East, and then that will increase Muslim animosity towards Americans, and then we can use that to kick out all Western influence. So we have about 2 more minutes. Any questions on chapter 30? Oh, I heard an Okay. 26? 25? Okay, well, I will see you all. Oh, sorry.
Why did they attack you? Why did they actually understand why?
Right. One of the key reasons was that, remember, Nazis understood Judaism in a social Darwinistic biological way. Jewish people were biologically bad and impure, and they would stain the pure Aryan German race. Once, twice, 3 times. Good luck on the test. I'll see you all on Wednesday, 8:10 a.m. And remember, that's only if you're in section 5. If you hear this recording, don't necessarily come here. Your final may be at a different date.
I just realized what he was talking about.